This is the Orlando Sentinel's editorial board interview for the Democratic primary in House District 35. Today we have two of the three candidates joining us, Tom Keene and Rishi Bagga. And also with us today are my colleagues, our Insight editor Jay Reddick and our columnist Scott Maxwell. And I am Chris Fluker. I'm the opinion editor of the Sentinel. And we will spend about 30 minutes today with our candidates and give everybody a chance to get to know them a little bit. And I will start with the first question, something that is very much on our minds, both locally and on the state level. Florida has a housing crisis. What solutions do you see? And as part of this, would you address whether you think the Sadowski Fund is appropriately targeted, assuming that they spend all the Sadowski Fund on housing, appropriately targeted to meet the needs that are going on right now? And let's start with Mr. Bagga.
Absolutely. So first of all, let me just thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderful to have the chance to speak to you all. Let's talk a little bit about housing. No question that this has been a tremendous issue in our community. And, something I always think about is there's stuff we have to think about on the supply side and on the demand side. Certainly the demand is extremely high to move down here in Florida. We've seen that demand increase in the last 2 years. So the question is, what mechanisms do we have to address it? Now, when it comes to the Sadowski Fund, I think it's important to note here, we talk about it a lot now because we are in this crisis. This thing has been underfunded for 20 years. Right, we've had this, fund which is supposed to be pulling money from our doc stamps, and for the last 20 years, it's been rated over and over and over again. It's become habitually rated, to be honest with you, and so while there's been some patting on the back that's happened this past session by funding Sadowski, I think it's important to note it's been funded at a lower level than it should have been to begin with. So first thing we need to do is bring it back up to the higher level. And second, it's to actually fund it. I think the Sadowski Fund is essential to making sure that housing is affordable to Floridians. Another thing I'll talk about is this sort of Hometown Heroes program that has been suggested or brought up about giving down payment assistance. I'm not opposed to giving down payment assistance to teachers, firefighters, and first responders. The question becomes, should that money be coming out of the Sadowski Fund? And I think there too, rather than fully funding Sadowski and using it for where it perhaps is most needed right now, which is rental assistance and helping individuals who can't afford a place to rent, the money's being pulled out of there and being put into, single family homes and those sort of situations as well. So I'm not opposed to having programs that help first responders and teachers, but that money shouldn't be coming out of Sadowski. Sadowski should be, it is designed as this sort of emergency fund that can help people, who literally have nowhere to live, at least get rental assistance. And so I think that's the appropriate use of those funds. I would support fully funding it at its original higher levels.
All right, Mr. Keene.
Great. Well, good morning again. The first thing I would say is I don't know that the Sadowski Fund is underfunded. It's oversubscribed, if you will, and that the legislature continues to take money out. If it was left to the amount that's coming in and it went to housing, that would be available in our toolbox. So it's just a little bit of a nuance there, but I think it, and we're saying basically the same thing. The legislature has been taking money out of that fund and using it for purposes it wasn't designed for. So we need to stop doing that, and we need to make sure that going forward we use it. And it's an example where the legislature also does things with environmental in environmental area as well, where they take money that basically was programmed already for another purpose. The other thing I would say is we need to be thinking about, not in my backyard. So we do hear a lot about growth and other tension that we hear from current residents whenever we add housing and and folks to areas. So we probably need to figure out, there's going to be a tension there, right? We want traffic to not be crazy on the road. So it's got to be a whole earth approach, if you will. So transportation's got to be a part of it. Density's got to be a part, as well as the funding and the private public partnerships that Sadowski could potentially bring to the table. So it's a very complex issue, and it's not just Sadowski. So transportation is a key piece of it as well. I'm just going to stop right there because I think I've got it, the answers there. We'll keep going. Thanks, Jay.
If I could actually ask if I could ask sort of a quick follow-up to you guys. I know we've discussed Sadowski, but a lot of the issues with housing, as Mr. Keene mentioned, are focused in terms of development. And how do you solve the housing crisis in terms of, do you repurpose current land? Do you develop more? Do you build more housing up or out? What's the more general non-Sadowski philosophy that you have in terms of helping the housing crisis with supply? Mr. Keene, let's start with you.
Well, so we've seen some things, for example, in Osceola, where they're converting some of the low. I don't know what, I want to be careful with the word I use, but the motels that were on 192, trying to convert those over to at least semi-permanent housing. That's a drop in the bucket, but at least it's a potential help to some folks to be able to use those types of facilities and to be converted over. Another big thing is we need to work with local county and city governments to make sure that zoning allows for more dense application. That, with zoning, a lot of times they'll say, well, we only want a single family house on this lot, period. That's it. You can't do anything else. In the neighborhood I live in, which is here in Lake Nona, they've taken a slightly different approach. So they allow garage apartments, they allow multi-family or townhouse style along with single family. So the density gets a little higher. The part that's missing out here, though, is the public transportation piece. So if you're out here, you're kind of on a desert island, if you will, from public transportation. Makes it really hard to get anywhere to and from work. So that's got to be a piece of it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bagga.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of those things. I think those are all different approaches that we can take. I think the general philosophy and general approach we need to take, and a lot of these, of course, require that we work closely with the local government and county commissions and whatnot. But I think the general approach needs to be to try to build up rather than always out. And I think the approach we've had far too often is to build out and suffer the environmental and transportation and all these other damages that come with doing that. So let's focus on what we already have. I agree. I think where we can use urban infill, we should do that. Oops, sorry. Where we can use urban infill, we should certainly do that. And if you go through Orange and Osceola, there's plenty of land that's underutilized or unutilized. And so where we can promote and create incentive to use that property, then that's what we should do, rather than always kind of creating the large, suburban sprawl that is far too common in Florida.
I thought I would ask, I perused both of your websites, and both of you had better education, particularly better funding for education, as one of, I think actually it was listed as both of your top priorities. That's music to a lot of Floridians' ears, and something I happen to agree with, but the devil often comes down to the details. The question is, I'm curious where you would get that funding from, either shifting or new revenues, and we'll start with you, Mr. Bagga.
Yeah, absolutely. So no question that that I find education to be the biggest issue that we're facing, right? We're in a situation now where we have 9,000 teachers that are missing, and we're looking at the start of the school year for that. So that needs to be addressed immediately. Something I like to bring up is I am an Orange County public school kid. I went to Orange County public schools. And so, I am a believer in the public school system. I think there's a few things that are happening as far as funding. First of all, we've had some of these are philosophical approaches. We've had this philosophy of diverting money away from public schools and putting them into charter and private schools through vouchers. And I think that's a trend that needs to swing the other direction. So some of those funds, and I guess this has been something that we could have seen coming. If you start taking money away from the public school system and putting it into vouchers and charters, and the public school system is going to be starved. And I suspect that's the intention of some of the folks who wanted these programs in the first place. So let's swing the pendulum in the other direction and make sure that the funding is taken care of. Look, I think that there's a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to budget to try to make sure that we have the revenues. We need to make sure we look at corporate taxes, make sure we have, we are willing to make sure corporations are paying their fair share of taxes. We need to make sure that we, look at enforcement of that as well. So all of these things, I think, are ways that we can address the funding, but to me, we need to move around whatever we need to move around to make sure that that funding is there. It's worth noting we're towards the bottom, if not just about at the bottom, of teacher pay in the state. And what that ends up doing is, we're losing teachers in droves. We cannot educate our kids by doing that. So I think we need to make this a goal and find the money for it. And I think we can do that by, again, moving money away from this approach of voucher and charter schools, and also making sure we look at our corporate tax system and make sure the money's there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Keene?
Sure. So again, Republicans have been in the legislature for the last 24 years. So we can clearly lay the problem at their doorstep, period. That's the first thing to say out the gate. I'm running for the Democratic primary, Rishi and I are, so we're going to have that philosophy up front, but the evidence is there. And so when money is flowing to voucher programs for private schools and to charters, I would ask, where's the metrics, where's the data to show that those schools have performed better, which was the original intent, to show that they can do things better and therefore we can divert funds from public schools, and they have failed miserably. There is evidence of a few schools that have exceeded or done well, but for the most part, all of those schools have underperformed, at least on the, I'm just going to say they've underperformed, but we don't really know that they've underperformed because they don't allow their numbers to be seen. They're not transparent. So again, we have to start with that transparency. They should be held to the same standards as public schools. And when we start seeing the results in black and white in front of everybody, then parents can make decisions that are informed. And I think we're going to see folks flooding back to public schools. So we need to divert the money that was going to private and charter schools. We need to be bringing it back into the public school system. We do need to stop with extra tax breaks for corporations. I'm not in favor of increasing taxes, but we need to stop giving companies tax breaks while our children in our schools suffer. It just doesn't make sense. Tax on schools are the single largest, or for schools are the single largest part of the budget. And we need to make sure that we're getting the appropriate funding for public schools, period.
Thanks so much. And I want to do one quick follow-up that I hope is just maybe a 15 or 30-second response. And that is, a lot of folks may not know either one of you. I imagine you've gone out of your way to seek endorsements. I saw some touted on your websites. If you were going to mention just one or two endorsements that you have accumulated that you think voters in the Democratic primary might be impressed with by Mr. Keene, who would that be for you?
Well, we just talked about schools, so I would say Johanna Lopez, who's school board member for District 2, and then we're looking at being in the legislature, and that would be State Senator Torres, two elected officials that I think would be my top two endorsements that I like to talk about. But as you said, there are many others. Okay,
thank you, Mr. Bagga. Any people or groups that you want to mention?
Yeah, I'm particularly proud of our endorsement by the Florida College Democrats and also by the Florida Progressive Caucus. I think that those two sort of reflect the, the college students who are facing a lot of these issues, and I think we're going to need their help and enthusiasm to win this in November. And same with the Progressive Caucus as well. I think that reflects the enthusiasm that we have for our campaign.
Okay, thank you very much.
That was a great question, Scott. This one is a tough one. And I don't expect anybody to have a comprehensive answer, but I'd like to get your thoughts. Starting next year, the voluminous flow of federal money that has swelled Florida's budget to $110 million is going to start drying up. How does Florida cope with that budget cliff that it's about to tumble over? And you've somewhat addressed this in your tax policies, but I wanted to get a better idea of what you think is coming and what the legislature is going to need to do. And let's start with Mr. Keene.
Yeah, that's a really tough question, and one that I haven't really explored fully. So I'm going to admit a little bit of not ignorance, but I just don't have the facts in front of me. I will say that we seem to be doing pretty well in Florida with revenues coming in prior to COVID, and obviously the state has to balance the budget every year, so we'll be looking at that. As long as the economy is doing well, I think Florida will end up doing well. Our priority should be on schools. I think that's my number one priority when it comes to the budget, and then everything will have to flow out of that. We'll just have to continue to make sure that we're not giving away too much in corporate tax breaks to make sure that we move forward.
Mr. Bagga?
Yeah. Yes, that is a tough question, but I think it's an important one. I mentioned a little bit earlier when we talked about education about the importance of looking at corporate taxes. I'll give you, a simple, I guess, a reflection of that is combined reporting, right? We're a state that doesn't require combined reporting, so you have corporations who have the ability to make subsidiary corporations that they're not reporting, and so it's pretty easy to get around paying corporate income tax in Florida. I'm a small business owner myself, and so I hear about these things. I think these are all, again, loopholes that we need to close to make sure that the fair share is being paid. And corporate is where I focus my efforts, because again, we don't have a state income tax, and our state constitution doesn't allow it, nor would I ever support an increase in that. But I think where we do have those revenues coming in, we need to look at that. I also think, look, there's the normal thing of looking at waste. We need to make sure that we're eliminating waste. You discussed this, right? We've had this huge flood of federal money, but what that federal money has also meant to me is there have been all these pet projects. We don't need an election police force. These things cost money. And so, where we can eliminate waste, I think we should absolutely do that. But look, I'm very open to studying up more on this issue. I'm sure that there are additional sources of revenues we can have. But I suspect if we can make sure corporations are paying their fair share, Florida's doing well otherwise, and we can eliminate waste and these sort of, quite frankly, some of the governor's pet projects, I think that's going to bring us more money.
Thank you very much. And actually, I had another question. If you are elected, either of you, you would almost certainly be a member of the minority party in a Republican-dominated legislature. How can you effectively serve the residents of District 35 from that position? What are your plans to accomplish that?
No question, you do come in with a bit of a disadvantage by being a member of the minority party. But I think there's a lot that I've done in my career that reflects my ability to sort of come up with common sense solutions to problems. One of the things I bring up the fact that I'm an attorney. I've been practicing this month. It'll be 16 years. So during that time, I've represented, everyone from, individual interests all the way to large corporation interests. So I'm used to sort of speaking the language of folks, and I think I can bring people in a room and try to come up with solutions together. Relatedly, I'm a certified circuit court and county court mediator. So regularly, I sit folks down at a table who often hate each other and completely disagree with one another, but together we can sit down and pave a path forward. So I think that those are skills that I bring to this, and that they would be well served. The other thing that I think is important, and I hear this a lot, especially from folks down in Osceola, is constituent services, and that is incredibly essential. A lot of folks, especially in the Osceola end, feel that their state government is not responsive, and I think in a lot of what I've done, I'm a former prosecutor, but I started my career as a domestic violence prosecutor. So I sort of have this very victim-centered approach to how I represent folks as an attorney. So I've spoken to individuals my whole career and heard their problems and tried to solve them. And I think that constituent services can be an important element of what I bring to the district.
Mr. King.
Sure. So Democrats right now have 42 of the 120 districts, I think, have Democrats. And right now, I think most counties do not suffer from that fact, in that just because they have a Democrat, they're not getting the services that they need. So I think moving forward, we'll continue to fight for the residents of this district. There are bipartisan things that we should concentrate on. So things that we already agree on should be the areas that we work the hardest for out of the gate. And that could be veterans issues. It could be fixing the unemployment system. It could be making sure that charter schools are held accountable. I mean, if you're a Republican, you should want good value for your taxpayer dollars. So those should be areas where we should be able to come together. Because we have two counties, and I'll circle back, and I know we're not debating, so I completely agree with Rishi on this. We need to have constituent services at the top of our list. We have several Democrats who have really shown how important that is and have outshined their Republican counterparts during the unemployment crisis during COVID. And they helped many constituents that weren't even in their district get unemployment benefits, for example. So we need to make sure that since we have two counties, that we have two county district offices, if you will, and that we make sure that we get out and about into the with the mobile offices and things like that, to make sure that we're meeting with constituents on a very regular basis, so they can count on us too. We need to be consistent with that presence.
Thank you very much. I actually had sort of a related question follow-up to that. With the growth and the sprawl of the new district, does that change beyond the constituent services onto the bigger issues? Does that change your focus as a legislator in terms of I'm here to serve my constituency? Are there new issues that pop up top of mind quicker? And we'll start with Mr. Keene.
Well, you talked about this at the very beginning, and so growth is the one topic that seems to be the issue that I hear the most from, especially in Osceola with traffic and some other things on Narcoossee Road. And again, the Narcoossee Road won't mean much to folks that don't live in District 35 or maybe that live in Avalon Park. I get that. But it is one of the main thoroughfares that folks in Osceola use today to get to and from work in Orange County. So we need to make sure that we're looking at those areas, and those the growth is probably not the same that it's been in other districts over the last 10 years, but clearly in Osceola it has. I mean, the county has just grown by leaps and bounds, and that's reflective of the new districts as well. I mean, Osceola ended up with a new state rep that's going to now cover St. Cloud and parts of BVL and Kissimmee. So clearly the population's increasing, so they're going to have different needs. But at the same time, in Osceola, we still have ranching communities to the south that need to be supported and represented. And we have more traditional suburban areas that are in the Orlando metro area, I guess we're all Orlando metro, but in the Orange County area. So I think that we're going to be doing more of the same, but I think growth ends up being one of the areas that we need to really help constituents with.
Thank you. Mr. Bagga?
Yeah, I'd echo that its growth is certainly I think this district in particular has a lot of that sprawl that we were discussing earlier, right? And so I think those are an issue, and I think relatedly, it's how we balance that with our environment. This district is also full of some environmental jewels. We've got Hal Scott in this district. We've got Split Oak in this district. There's been so much discussion of Split Oak, and I'll bring that up, right? That's a classic fight between growth and balancing the environmental damage that would come from that growth. I spoke out against Split Oak in the FCT meeting that happened back in April. I did a public comment or public testimony against it, because I believe that if we don't start taking a stand on some of this, right, then we're going to start losing the environment that makes Florida, Florida. So I think that this is the big issue for our district, that we will have to, that is perhaps unique to District 35, because we really are central to so many of these environmental lands. So balancing, how do we have growth that's smart, but also doesn't impact the environment, is something that we really need to do. And I think that's an issue that this district in particular faces.
Thank you both very much. We have actually come to our time. Did either of my colleagues have any other questions they wanted to squeeze in? Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, and as anybody can tell, we have left a lot uncovered, unfortunately. But I would like to give you each 2 minutes to give your elevator pitch as to why people should choose you as the Democratic nominee for District 35. Let's start with Mr. Keene.
Sure, thanks. And there are a lot of really important issues that we didn't cover, and reproductive rights to me is the top on my list. So let me just cover that in the minutes that we have left. So I don't think the stakes could be higher. And I followed the Sentinel and for the last few years on this issue. We just had a very large impact with the election out in Kansas. But I'd like to point back to, we had a very similar election here in Florida in 2012 with very similar results, where 55% of the public did not want to amend the Constitution to say that abortion was not included in our rights of privacy. So I think that ship sailed in 2012. But Republicans continue to come back and continue to try to take away the rights that we've already had. So one of my big priorities will be to make sure that women's reproductive rights, and I'll be fighting for them from the day that I arrive in Tallahassee. Briefly, I think my community service is important to mention as well. I serve on the Orlando Citizens Police Review Board. I'm on the Mayor's Veterans Advisory Council, and I've been on Congressman Soto's military advisory group as well with my military background. And we talked about it very briefly, but I have endorsements from Victor Torres, Johanna Lopez from Labor, and I just recently got a big endorsement from Alianza, the Puerto Rican civic group here in Orange County. So I think I'm the right guy, and hopefully this voting started already. We'll see how that turns out here in the next couple of weeks. Thank you for the opportunity to come before the editorial board.
Mr. Bagga.
Thank you again so much for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to this board, especially as a longtime Orlando Sentinel subscriber. Look, I've talked to you a little bit about my experience. I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a small business owner. I think these are all skills and experience I'd bring to this position, which I think would be invaluable, especially as somebody who wants to be a lawmaker. Having a real background in the law, I think, is something that will help me navigate this position, but most certainly would help constituents and the Democratic Party as we pick leadership for the future. But I think the biggest thing is to look to November, right? This election is a stop until we get to November, and we need to make sure that if we want all the changes that we're fighting for, we need to be able to win in November. So I ask, who's the best candidate to win in November? And I think that I'm that candidate. Let's look at this district. This is a district that's 52% minority. So we talk a lot as Democrats to make sure that we have minority representation. Well, I think it's important to elevate a minority voice who can speak to those communities that are currently underrepresented. You know, I'm 8% of this district is Asian American. There are no Asian Americans in the Florida legislature. There's never been a South Asian American elected to the Florida legislature. This is an important opportunity. It's not about tokenism. This is about making sure these communities have real representation and that we bring them into the process. If we have a candidate who can speak to these communities and get them to vote, that makes a big difference. Same thing with young voters. This is a district right outside of the University of Central Florida. We need these voters to show up and vote if we're going to win in November. I've raised the most in this race, and I think that reflects my enthusiasm and the enthusiasm of my voters. With respect to both of my opponents, both of them have run before. Both of them ran against Republicans and lost before. So we need candidates who can win in November. And I think that that should be our focus. I hope to have your support. And you can go on my website, rishibagga.com, and learn more about me. Thank you.
Thank you both. I really appreciate the time you spent with us. We've been talking with the representatives or the candidates for the Democratic primary in House District 35, which, as noted, covers a big hunk of East Orange and Osceola counties. The winner of the person who gets the most votes on August 23rd will go forward to the primary, and there is an incumbent. So I wish you both luck, and I thank you so much for spending this time with us.